Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So you may have seen my video recapping films 10 to 6 in my top 10 favourite films of 2019. Now I'm here to recap the all-important 5 to 1 entries. It's obviously counting down towards my favourite film of the year. So let's get cracking with film number 5, which is Rian Johnson's Knives Out, which has been nominated for sort of Golden Globes and stands to poised to potentially do well at the Oscars. Those of you who've been reading movie news lately will be aware that apparently Johnson is planning a sequel with Daniel Craig returning as the CSI KFC detective Benoit Blanc, who the character is kind of fundamental to the appeal of this incredibly funny, devious whodunit that is both a loving homage to Agatha Christie and the likes of movies like Clue, but it's also a kind of meta deconstruction of the appeal of the whodunit genre. It's about within the movie itself. There are people who are actively commenting on the enjoyments of seeing Daniel Craig's brilliant private investigator deconstruct this apparently impossible mystery in which all of these various suspects played by a fabulous ensemble of actors are all kind of floating around each other. Did they do it? Did they not do it? Who's responsible? Is there someone pulling the strings from behind the scenes? And it's that kind of awareness of genre combined with a sort of an actual sincere love of sort of storytelling craft that really earmarks this. Daniel Craig is terrific. Anna de Armas steals it as the sort of the can't lie otherwise she vomits nurse Marta. Scene-sealing performances from the likes of Chris Evans, Tony Collette, Michael Shannon, and Jamie Lee Curtis. Really, really great to see actors at the top of their game having a blast, but not at the expense of the audience. All the performances are tailored brilliantly to the script. Really well written. In at number 5 is Knives Out. And in at number 4, completely different kettle of fish, Minding the Gap from debut director Bing Liu. This played very, very well on the film festival circuit in America, but you might actually have missed this one. It's a really interesting documentary that almost takes the approach that Richard Linklater did with Boyhood, in that it's a narrative that is shot piecemeal over several years, in which we see the main subjects basically grow from kind of adolescent idealism into more sort of disillusioned adulthood. Except the key thing is with Boyhood, it was fictional. It was a fictional narrative, obviously using the same actors all the way through. This time round, what you have is Bing Liu and his two friends actually are the subjects of the documentary, and we pick up with them as sort of slacker skateboarders in this kind of declining American Rust Belt town, and then we follow them through relationships, through bad decisions, through to allegations of potential domestic abuse, and we have a really quite extraordinary confessional scene in which Liu himself gets his mother to basically perform a confessional interview on camera, which is very, very devastating. It's one of the most powerful scenes that I saw in a film last year. The director shows a real confidence in terms of how to editorialize and sculpt both his own life story and the life story of his two friends as well, in a way that feels very, very sincere. It doesn't feel cathartic or sensationalist. It touches on the difficulties of day-to-day life and how you rise above those difficulties. I thought this was a really, really impressive film. So in at number 4, Minding the Gap. And in at number 3, we have Beets, which is a black and white Scottish drama from director Brian Welsh, which is a really terrific, nostalgic ode to the Scottish music scene, and also to male friendship as well, in the form of Christian Ortega and Lorne MacDonald, who are friends in real life, and their chemistry off-screen translates to their on-screen bromance. They play two teenage friends who are about to go their separate ways. They're kind of from different sides of the tracks. They're, one of them is about to move away, so one sense this friendship is about to be torn asunder, but in the background there is the British government's crackdown on so-called sort of legal rave culture, and these two best mates realise that they have to come together for one kind of final blowout, in this kind of ecstatic, pulse pounding, euphoric rave party, and I love this film. I don't know anything about it. I'm not a fan of rave music. I wasn't alive at the time in 1994 in Scotland, so I've come to this completely fresh. But I think the beauty of the film is that you don't need to know anything about the music in order to enjoy it. The reason why I enjoyed it was because it's one of the best films about male friendship I've ever seen. I think that in terms of getting that platonic, comfortable intimacy between two male friends, not in a romantic way, but two male friends who are very, very comfortable in each other's company, who've grown up with each other, but who are about to go their separate ways, but who are connected through this love of this very specific genre of music. It's brilliantly observed. The black and white cinematography kind of gives it an inherently nostalgic, wistful feel, as that kind of cinematography always does. I thought this was a wonderful film. Again, a kind of small release. It might have passed some people by. As I said, it's directed by Brian Welsh, who does a terrific job with this. In at number 3 is Beets. And in at number 2, we have another black and white movie, Beets. Only this time it's not set in Scotland, but actually takes place in Cornwall, from director Mark Jenkin. This has scored well on the British independent film circuit, where it's actually proved, relative to its budget, actually something of a box office hit, which is delightful to see, because it's an incredibly peculiar, unique, challenging movie. I mean, I very rarely can I say that I've seen a film that genuinely kind of defies categorization, but this is definitely one of them. It's a black and white movie, as I said, set in a Cornish fishing village, that was shot silently on an old Bolex camera, which means everything that you hear, from the crashing waves to the seagulls to the dialogue, has all been dubbed in afterwards. So what you get is this very peculiar detachment between the visuals, the black and white visuals, which kind of have a almost 1960s documentary feel, 1950s 60s documentary feel, with which have are in a strange discord with the sound effects. There's like a disjunct between what you're hearing and what you're watching, and that's deliberate. It has an almost kind of wryly comical effect at first. It kind of underlines the central theme about the central character is a fisherman who doesn't like the fact that his father's old fishing cottage has been taken over by these Airbnb advocates who've come down from the home counties. And it's kind of the movie's about lack of communication, about how lack of communication ultimately initially is kind of blackly amusing and then ultimately leads to tragedy. And the fact that you've got this kind of disjunct between what you're watching and what you're hearing kind of underlines that theme. It's kind of everything feels kind of out of step with each other, like intentionally. And I think it's terrific. I grew up near the seaside, and I think it captures the environment brilliantly. The sounds, you can almost breathe in the air, and certainly the idea of the corruption of the typical small seaside town. You know, do you go with it or do you battle against the tide? In the end, there is a kind of compromise that has to be made. So there are real wise undercurrents to this, particularly in the climate we're living in now. There are very, very sort of compassionate undercurrents about a need for solidarity and compassion. In at number 2, directed by Mark Jenkin, is Beets. And in at number 1, the second time that this filmmaker's topped a best of a certain year list for me, it's Jordan Peele with Us. I mean, what can I say about Us? Well, let's start with its omission from the Golden Globes and the BAFTAs, which kind of prove that, you know, awards bodies inherently are bullshit. I mean, I imagine most film fans will kind of know that already. Let's, you know, scrap talk of the awards. You know, this movie doesn't need awards. It's a monumental achievement in and of its own. Obviously, Jordan Peele's follow-up to Get Out, which resulted in him becoming the first ever African-American filmmaker to win the Best Original Screenplay Oscar. It remains to be seen if he's going to repeat that trick again with Us. I mean, he ought to, because it's a far more ambitious film than Get Out, which is quite remarkable given that Get Out was pretty ambitious anyway. Story of doppelgangers that fans out into a damning indictment of American culture. Again, there's a pun in the title, like US, Us, that also takes swipes at the Hands Across America campaign about the nature of the archetypal boogeyman tale, the idea that you've got a shadow self that is dwelling out of sight that might want to do you harm. So there is a kind of like mystical archetypal quality to the movie that sort of is embodied by this sensational performance from Lupita Nyong'o, who plays both Adelaide Wilson and Red, her tethered like doppelganger. absolute masterclass in physical acting. It's really quite phenomenal, and the beauty of the film is that it can be watched multiple times, and when you see it once and watch it back again, you realise that you're reading the film in a completely different way. You're reading the characters in a completely different way. That horror can be read as tragedy, and sincerity can be read as something quite disingenuous. It's a movie that's got all of these symmetrical kind of readings to it, and that's obviously rendered in the imagery as well. Sort of brilliantly scored by Mike Labels, who I've had the pleasure of interviewing twice. He's so funny and so warm, and it's a really inventive sort of choral mixed with Bernard Herrmann-esque score, and there's great performances from everybody else. I have to give a shout out to Shahadi Wright Joseph, who plays the daughter Zora slash Umbre, the tethered individual. Again, the textbook example of how to make something really terrifying through physical acting. But it's a movie that's got a lot on its mind, and yet it never ever sacrifices entertainment. It's really scary and really funny, and it will leave you thinking. I think it's an across-the-board success, and watching the emergence of Jordan Peele within the last few years, the fact that he's emerged as this horror comedy director extraordinaire, I think has been one of the most exciting things of the last decade. I really hope it's going to continue in this decade. So there you have it. My favourite film of 2019 is Us, written and directed by Jordan Peele. So dare say there's a few controversial choices in there. What were your favourite films of 2019? Drop me a comment here at Kubrick Corner, and I'll no doubt see you soon. Bye.